G'day. I'm going to go through a few things today. There's been a few developments, newspaper articles, etc. And spare a thought for those who are doing it a bit tough. I think for all of us, a fair bit of emotion running around. Andrew Hastie, I'll deal with that article first. I praised him this morning, and I haven't read the Twitter responses. I saw some people complain and said, don't trust him or whatever, which is fair enough. I don't know all the ins and outs of Andrew Hastie, but I did think it was good that he accepted some responsibility. And I did think it was particularly good, I guess. What I liked was he said, the Public Affairs Department have got a lot to answer for. That's what they called in the Defence Force. Public Relations is a big department, and because they did not value the truth. And he also says the generals readily need to front up, and I liked that. He took responsibility for his own failings. He said, let's not forget that the false messages were put out not by the soldiers, but by the Defence Department at a very high level. And thirdly, he said the generals need to take responsibility. So that was enough to get praise from me. If you know anything behind the scenes, credit to you, I don't know that. And I accept anyone might know more about that than I do. Some Central Sydney soundtrack there. Also, the letters in the Herald yesterday were fantastic, very supportive. I need to say though, while I was an important part of uncovering the story, my complaint was always against the generals, always against the public affairs, looking up rather than looking down. And the real heroes, the SAS people who said, no, it's not right. Now, they might not have stopped things as they happened, but they did what they could, and I think they're very brave, and I reckon, as I said, I'm a supporter of the SAS. The reason this whole thing started, for me, wasn't because I thought the SAS were, bloodthirsty people. Quite the opposite. I thought that the government were using them as scapegoats to cover something up, and they were. Remember, I think there's three major villains, and the rest of the SAS, are extremely good people. Certainly, put it this way, if you were stuck in a hostage situation, and that was always a possibility for me in Afghanistan, because I had to visit the prisons, and it would have been easy for me to be captured at various points because I was on my own a fair bit. With a small guard. Now, the SAS are exactly the sort of people you'd want to come and rescue. There's no doubt about it. I mean, they are very good at the job. It doesn't mean, the things that Brereton has found out weren't real, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There were very good people there, and as I said, they need to. That needs to be remembered. This brings me to another point. I don't think the department have handled the whole situation that well. I think that they've left the impression. I mean, they could have used a sniper rifle effectively. I mean, as an analogy, to hit those three patrol commanders, and that would have done the job. If they'd done something earlier, 2006, they could have started. But let's say 2010, certainly 2012. it would have been a lot better. Instead of using a sniper rifle, I reckon to a certain extent, the leadership of the Defence Force have used mortars, in that they've killed a lot of collateral damage in the SAS and in fact the Defence Force, the wider Defence Force. And I know they keep saying things like, oh, you know, it's good people out there, but there's no doubt that a lot of people have been smeared who didn't need to be smeared. And I don't think that was an accident. I think that they obviously told Samantha Crumboats to that she had clearance to tell her story the week before the Broden report came out, and in it she revealed some very, well, I wouldn't say sensational, but very disturbing things. Now, that can only have been to get the public against the wider SAS community. That was bad, I think. It wasn't necessary. The report was about to come out, and that again was an informational. But again, Hastie used that phrase, so that's why I gave him credit. He said, we use a lot of information operations. For those of you who don't understand, that is basically propaganda, lies by the department to make you think certain things. And it's pretty bad. That was the first thing I kicked up a fuss about. As I said, the information I believe was because we were covering up the war crimes in 2012. I believe the Defence Force leadership knew about it in 2012. There's a whole lot of evidence to suggest that was the case. But in 2013, they tried to put, they made a huge fuss, as I've said, about the guy that cut the dead Taliban's hand off. And they said that was the worst thing that had ever happened. Now, I think we now know that that was, you know, that wouldn't have even made the top 50. And even it wasn't even a crime. And that made me suspicious. They also wanted to put the guy who directed an Apache helicopter to fire a legitimate target, and the Apache helicopter got the wrong target. They wanted to put him in jail. They wanted to put another soldier in jail for shooting someone dead in a legitimate operation, someone who you couldn't have possibly been seen, and someone was sitting on top of a rooftop, and he made legitimate concern that it was an insurgent. That's not a murder, you know, that's a mistake. And the defence leadership wanted to put all those people in jail, and that's why I started to say, hang on, what's going on here? You never put people in jail for making mistakes before 2013. And it's not even within our legal procedures. Something is up, and I was right. But that's what I saw. I saw the cover-up. I saw the, and I think this is really despicable, and this is in support of the SAS, and it's against the management and the leadership. They were prepared to put innocent people in jail in order to protect the guilty. Now, if you think about that, what are the flow-on effects of that? That means that public image was more important to the generals than truth, even to the extent of, you know, absolutely messing around their own people. It's pretty despicable, and it's obviously completely against military principles. The same with the rules of engagement. They put out this thing called the Rules of Engagement Amplification. It was written in late 2012. It was published, you know, made rubber stamped in 2013 by General Hurley, now the Government General. Now, it said a strange thing which I picked up on. It said you could, you know, it's listed all these very onerous rules of engagement. You've got to, you know, it's got to be reasonable. It's got to be, they've got to be Taliban. You've got to be able to try to capture them. You've got to be able to, they've got to be a threat. They were just like throwing, they were throwing far too many tests on rules of engagement for a battle. This is when bullets are flying around. And at the end of it, they said, if you don't do any of these 6 things, you go to jail for murder. which is not something you normally put in the rules of engagement. You don't put legal. They actually quoted the section, and I thought that's strange, because a mistake in battle, this was just talking about mistakes, it wasn't talking about cutting people's throats, it was just saying, if you're in a firefight and you don't do these 6 things, you're going to go to jail for murder. And that was wrong. I asked them to correct it, and they just totally refused. And it was strange that they just totally refused. It suggested that they was trying to say to me, you don't know what's going on, there's big picture stuff here. They didn't even bother arguing with me. And I think that was, again, as an indicator to say they knew something bigger, much bigger was happening, and this was window dressing. It was also leaked to the press. All those investigations I talked about were immediately leaked to the press. I had a reporter call me about one of those non-crimes before the sort of leadership told me about it. So that was strange. It was like, as I said before, they were trying to say, whatever, look over here, look how hot we are on this stuff. Don't look over there. So that was my complaint to begin with. And the more I looked into it, we found the war crimes eventually, and I gave the classified details to the ABC, which became the Afghan files. So that all, the rest of the story you all know well, but you can't just, and this is what the leadership don't do, it's easy just to blame, say all the SAS are bad or all the SAS are good, but both sides are wrong. You've got to give people, you've got to follow the law. You've got to if people do the right thing, you've got to stand up for them. And if people do the wrong thing, you've got to act swiftly and justly. But of course, the Defence Public Affairs don't like that. It's not clean. They want to be able to put out broad brush statements. And above all, I think the overarching objective for defence is to make the generals look good, make the minister look good. Whatever. Truth doesn't matter. Just, do that. Everything is stage managed. Which brings me to the other. This is why I think the real reason they did Brereton, well, there was journalists, there was me asking questions, there was SAS people talking. All of us contributed, but the head of Defence Legal told me in 2014 on a trip to England, which I think they sent me on to try to bribe me, stop me complaining, but he said to me, the reason we need to do what we're doing is because we're worried about the International Criminal Court. Now that was very interesting, because at the time I thought he was an idiot, because from the things I'd seen in 2013 that I've just explained to you, either mistakes or a legitimate cutting off a hand in order to identify the fingerprints, they were not things that would go in front of the International Criminal Court. What I didn't know is that he knew a lot more. He knew about the 2012 thing. This is the head of Defence Legal. This is like a general equivalent. And he slipped up telling me that, because now I know, but I'm only going to call him as a witness in my case, that in 2014, the senior leadership, because he advises the minister, etc., and the CDF, the chief of the Defence Force, they knew then that the International Criminal Court was a possibility. And the reason why, the really despicable reason why they care about the International Criminal Court more than they care about Brereton, because the International Criminal Court looks at leadership responsibility. They put, the Bosnian Serb leader, Radovan Karadzic, that's how you pronounce his name, they put the Sudanese president, they tried to put him on trial. They put leaders on trial. So you can imagine, you can see now, that was driving the minister, that was driving defence. Don't think they really care about. One of the things, I looked through all the secret files, I looked through all the, looking for things to prove my case. And one thing I never saw in any of the thousands of things I looked through was a comment by a general saying, we can't do this because it'll be bad for the soldiers. We can't do this because it'll be bad for the long-term ethos of the organisation. That was never a consideration. And that chilled me. You know, coming from a UK background, coming from Sandhurst, I couldn't believe that it wasn't even a factor. I think that they're still looking after themselves, and I'm glad there was a good letter in the Australian today just talking about the Yamashita principles. And it's one of the great, beautiful ironies in this case to say, we put a Japanese general on trial after the Second World War in a controversial circumstances, saying, you know, you're responsible for the war crimes, soldiers. And he was very high up, committed. Yamashita was his own. And he said, well, I can't be responsible for what people did on the ground. You know, he was like a 3-star general. And we said, you know, you are responsible for anything that you knew about or should have known about, and you should have known about this, and we hung him. Now, how do you think people like General Hurley would go under the Yamashita principles? And typical of General Hurley, he came out on the weekend saying, oh, I'm shocked and horrified. You know, you reckon he would say, I take responsibility. And I think the reason, I mean, people in the defence force will know why. We seem to promote the worst. The people with sloping shoulders, the people who are blamers, squealers, they get to the very top. You reckon he's got nothing to lose now? You reckon he'd think, well, I'm going to take responsibility? No, absolutely not. It's pretty disgraceful. What we really need to look at, and this is, you know, my complaint is not about the last war, it's over. It's about the next war. And we need to look at the propaganda machine, Defence Public Affairs, and when they tell us the Chinese have done this or the Chinese have done that, or heroic action by such and such, we need to take with a grain of salt. It doesn't mean it's not true, but just because the Defence Department says something is true does not mean it's true. It hurts me to say that, but it's a fact. And I'm meaning the top level people here. And that's including everything. They blame people, as I said, they're prepared to put people in jail who are innocent, and they were prepared to let guilty people off. So don't blame the SAS. And remember, even the worst people in the SAS were mirror images of the generals who commanded them. Mirror images. So, that's it for today. As I said, I only wanted to set the record straight. And I will speak to you soon.